On Monday. The PowerPoint slides are on Brightspace, so if you're one of those people that has to have them downloaded and in front of you, that's what they're there for. And if, whatever, you want to look at them at some point later on, that's where you find them. So on Monday, after all our introductory stuff, we basically only made it to the first slide where, if you recall, basically, your textbook starts off pointing out the differences between some of these creation stories, creation narratives, all right, that we see spread throughout history by various cultures versus the scientific view of why and how the earth and the universe was formed. And so, thinking back to Monday towards the very end, because most of these creation stories, most of these creation narratives are based in some type of religious belief. What was the original purpose of religion or inventing the gods? Why did people come up with it?
To explain what couldn't be explained?
Yeah, and in this case, nature, all right? Yes, today we have clouds because there's a hurricane coming in off Florida, and so the jet stream coming in from the west is pulling moisture from the Great Lakes, okay, and blah, 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 whatever the weather girl said this morning on, WKTV. But people thousands of years ago do not understand that, okay? And so Thor is angry. Okay, I'm just going with Norse mythology because, Thor is the god of thunder. Okay, and yeah, those look, it was raining this morning, so those look kind of nasty out there. Okay, and Thor is banging his hammer. That's why you hear, stuff like that. Or Zeus is mad, so he's throwing his lightning bolts at people. All right, and so yes, we invent religion, we invent the gods to explain the things that can't be explained. All right, and so when it comes to these creation stories, when it comes to these creation narratives, in a history class, we don't actually look at them to tell us how the earth was created, but we look at them to learn about the cultures that actually came up with those stories. Okay, we take a more scientific view. All right, and of course, according to these creation stories, and I already mentioned my background, I was raised in a Christian home, so Adam and Eve and naked and talking snakes and magic fruits, and that's basically the story, right? A naked woman talks to a snake and she eats a magic apple, and boom, there's humanity, okay, and whatever, okay. No, humans did not. Oops, wrong way. Humans didn't just appear, okay? There are changes, there are things over time. So we're starting with the very, very basic, and just FYI, you do need to know a couple of H words, okay? Number one, hominids, okay? These are the first things that we can classify as almost proto-human, but not quite. Because hominids not only include what eventually becomes this, or this, what all that is. Hominids are divided into three categories, okay? Number one, gorillas, okay? So gorillas are part of the hominid group, okay? Number two, I can't spell chimpanzee, so I just put chimps, all right? But if you want to spell chimpanzee, go right ahead. All right, so chimpanzees, okay? And then finally, okay, the ones that we care about gorillas and chimps too, but the ones that we're going to concern ourselves with are humans, which this is a relatively newer term that we've come up with, hominins, okay? So, hominins refers to, and of course, it refers not just to humans, like what we are today, but other groups of humans, all right? I'll get into the other H words. Okay, we are classified as Homo sapiens, but there were other branches of humanity that no longer exist. Okay, so hominids, all right, gorillas, chimps, hominins. Hominins is, or that, okay? And so, what separates then humans, hominins, from the other group of hominids. What separates us from chimps and gorillas? Because when you break it down, all right, and this is science, like we share over 95% of our DNA with chimpanzees, okay? A little change in certain things and you know, you've got a tail, you're about that tall, you're swinging from trees, okay? So, well, speaking of tails and swinging, as opposed to chimpanzees and gorillas, humans walk on two legs, bipedal locomotion. Okay. Now, some of you might say, "Well, no, gorillas can do it." And I've seen yes, they can, but they do it for brief periods. Then they got to go back down to the knuckles. Okay. Whereas, I mean, boom. All right. Now, I may have a problem because, like, I'm old and maybe get vertigo on occasion. So yeah, I might need to. Or after a crazy weekend, I'm crawling on all fours. But for the most part, all right, two legs. All right, as opposed to gorillas and chimps, which don't. Okay. Number two, somewhere along the way, humans discovered fire. Okay. First, they actually discover fire. More than likely, lightning strikes a tree or dry brush, and suddenly, whoa, here's this stuff. And of course, humanity is able to realize that, ooh, warm, not warm, okay? And my food, rough and chewy and hard to eat, put it near this for a little bit, and oh my goodness, oh, nice medium rare steak, okay? A lot more flavorful, all right? And then over time, eventually, humans learn how to reproduce this without, just a natural whatever, okay? Humans begin to use tools. Now, that's not to say that chimps and gorillas can't learn to use tools, all right? But hominins are the first ones to realize it, to discover it, and then eventually, after thousands of years, actually create tools. And yes, probably the earliest tools were pieces of rock or old bones that they could use to pound things, all right? Eventually, that changes, all right? We're not talking about the tool aisle at Home Depot, all right, quite yet, all right? Skills and language, okay? While gorillas and chimps can master basic communication, what I'm doing now, okay, that is unique to humans, all right? And no matter how smart you think your dog is or your cat is or whatever, okay, this does not happen. All right, and so, but of course, unlike the stories, okay, we didn't just pop out talking to snakes, being convinced to eat magic apples. All right, in this case, the speech, the language, those skills takes time, and it happens over a period of thousands of years. And then finally, that sense of self, that being able to identify your own uniqueness and your own, sense of being, okay? As I mentioned, okay, this doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen over 6 months. The earliest hominin that we can trace back through both fossils and other archaeological things, 23 million years ago, okay? So between 23 million years and about where we get to the point where we have some basic human structure was about 150,000 years ago, okay? So we're looking at like 22,850,000 years. Humanity went from, to basic language, being able to make fire, being able to use rudimentary tools, being able to do all of that. Okay, so we're talking about millions and millions and millions of years. All right. Now, this process, okay, is known as evolution. All right. You do need to know the meaning. All right. I'll throw out hints like that for you. So hint, hint. Know what evolution means. Okay. Basic definition. The process, and most of us most people, unfortunately, just think of, oh yeah, human, you think of monkeys to human. No, everything evolves, okay? So the process of both plants and animals, okay, changing over generations, whether it's hundreds, thousands, millions of years from wherever it started to what we have today, okay? Yeah, it may have started off as a wolf, but there was a hell of a lot of stuff happening for it to come out a pug, all right? And I use pugs because those things can be cute or ugly depending on your perspective. I like pugs, but some people are like, oh, the eyes, all right? Yeah, how did we go from, wolf to bulging eyes and only that big? Okay, now some of it was man-made evolution, but it was a process. Okay, now one of the things that happen in natural evolution, so where we're not involved, okay, is a process known as natural selection, which basically just means survival of the fittest. Okay, you are able to adapt to the environmental changes around you. Okay? And by adapting, your genetic code gets passed on to the next generation, whereas the genetic code of the animal or the plant or whatever that didn't adapt dies out. Okay? That is why we are the only form of human now, as opposed to the Neanderthals, the Australopithecines, the Cro-Magnon, and unfortunately this isn't an anthropology class, so I can't get into all of the different forms of humanity that at one point existed, okay? But, all right, because of this, certain species die out, others continue, okay? So it does not mean, and this is one thing, no offense with religious people, no, it does not mean that one day you have a monkey and then the monkey has a human baby. And it's like, oh my God, we changed from monkeys to humans. And I've actually heard people go like, well, if evolution's true, why are there still monkeys? No, that's not evolution, okay? It's not going from point A to point B like right away, all right? It's these gradual changes over time that allow us to survive in this environment, okay? It is those changes that then get passed on. Probably the best example, and I think I actually wrote this to remind, I just wrote YouTube to remind myself, but I forgot to set it up. But I'll show it to you on Friday. During the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s in England, people first start using factories and other manufacturing to produce products. And one of the things, though, is that there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of smoke because they use coal to fire their plants. Well, in this part of England, there was two different types of moths. One that was very light colored and another one that was much darker. And so they found over time, because the factories are spewing all of this smoke, everything is turning like dark and gray around them. And the lighter colored moths are beginning to die off. Because why? The darker color moths are able to blend in with all of the soot and the waste, okay? And so little by little, that DNA, that gene for the lighter colored moth begins to disappear, all right? Once we switch from coal to other things, yes, the lighter colored moths make a comeback in England, all right? Because now, the darker moths don't have that camouflage, that shield. And so environmental changes could either be natural or caused by humans, but either way, depending on how your species adapts, determines whether, those genes get passed on or not. All right, so I told you that you need to remember a couple of H words, okay? Hominid, all right? Chimps, gorillas, humans. Hominin, the collective term for different human species, okay? And now, speaking of some of these human species, all right, you do need to know three of them, all right? Like I said, if this was Anthropology 101, we would totally go into Australopithecine and Java man and Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal and all of the other, evolutionary stages of humanity. Or I'm sorry if it was like, I guess it could also be paleontology. But it's not, unfortunately. So you do need to know 3 of them though, okay? The first one is Homo habilis, okay? Why is it important to remember Homo habilis? Because by our best guess, Homo habilis was the first hominin to use tools, okay? They were the ones that figured out, hey, if we pound this with a rock, it's a lot more effective and probably less painful if we do it with our hands, okay? And so the use of basic tools. Now, once again, don't think it's like walking down to Home Depot, buying a miter saw, and okay, now we got power. No, probably just basic stones, okay, to be able to use to pound things, or in this case, to like kill animals, all right? Probably a lot more effective in their hunting. Hit something over the head with a rock as opposed to punching it to death or whatever else they may have done, okay? Now, eventually, and with subsequent hominins, we do see a perfection, all right? So that eventually they learn that you don't really just need a blunt object. You can actually shape it, you can actually carve it into something a bit more efficient. And oh my goodness, if you make the pointy end sharp enough and you tie it to the end of a stick, you can now like kill a more dangerous animal, probably with more meat, at a safe, sorry, you're gonna be the jaguar here, at a safer distance than if I have to come up to you and smack it with a rock and risk being, eaten.
Just a quick thing, we were also really good at like throwing like animals.
Yes, that eventually happens, all right? That's a couple thousand years later, all right? So yeah, okay? Homo erectus, okay? You need to remember Homo erectus because, number one, they were the first hominin that we are, we're taking our best guess here, that we are aware that is walking like this, okay? So even though Homo habilis did use tools, they were still doing one of these, okay? All right, whereas Homo habilis was, full upright bipedal, okay? Don't need to swing the arms, don't need to lean on the knuckles anymore, okay? They were the first to recognize, and this comes now with the increasing brain capacity, that there is a connection, okay, between individuals from the same group, okay? I'm a cat owner. I have technically 3, but one of them's not mine. I only own 2 of them. But there's 3 cats in my house, okay? So I love cats, all right? If you don't, well, F you, all right? Cats are awesome, all right? No, dogs are okay too, all right? But I remember reading this one article thing, and this lady was like distressed because she couldn't figure out how one of her kittens got pregnant, one of her cats got pregnant because she had a litter. And the veterinarians was like, well, do you have any other cats? It's like, well, yeah, her brothers and sisters. It's like, well, she probably got impregnated by one of the male cats. And the lady was like, no, that's impossible. They're her brothers. And it's just like, yeah, some of you are chuckling now. Why? Yeah, cats don't understand that. Cats don't recognize that. They're purely instinct. Female cat goes into heat. Male cats, didn't matter if they came from the same litter, are going to do their boy cat thing. All right. Homo erectus is the first hominin to recognize that, wait a minute, there's like some kind of weird family connection here. We came from the same group. And then that person also came from a similar group, and we're cousins, type of thing. And so, and also stay united as a family, because most other hominins and most other creatures, I guess you can look at like cat behavior or lion behavior or dog behavior, stay together. And people are like, oh my God, it's like the boy cat, the mama cat, the baby cat. Yeah, most don't do that, okay, type of thing. But in this case, being together in a group of family, okay? Homo erectus is the first to discover fire, okay? Now, they don't know how to recreate it, but they're the first to realize that you can use it to stay warm, you can use it to make your food a little bit yummier, okay, and easier to eat, all right? And finally, okay, they are the first that begin to wander and go out, okay? They develop a lifestyle that we call hunter-gatherer. We're not very original. What kind of lifestyle is a hunter-gatherer? What do they do to live? They hunt and what do they gather? Food, yeah. That's it, okay? And so they begin to, obviously, if you're a hunter, you follow the animals, gathering, and I always use apple trees. There's no apple trees outside, but you know, there's an apple tree outside, and once you've picked off all the apples and eaten them, what do? You move on and find another apple tree. And you tend to forget, oh wait, wasn't there, who cares? There's more apples that way, okay? And so they begin to move around, all right? Whereas with the other hominins, they tended to stay in the same place, probably because they didn't live long enough to really like begin to migrate or grow a family or do anything like that, okay? Finally, the last hominin you need to remember is Homo sapiens, okay? Now, Homo sapiens are modern humans. Each of us in here are classified as Homo sapien, all right? They are the ones that basically outlasted the other hominins, okay? There are no more Homo erectus. There are no more Homo habilis. There are no more of the other, you know, groups of hominins that are classified, okay? Now, we first notice Homo sapien, or at least the first evidence of Homo sapien, around 300,000 years ago, okay? So, first hominin, 23 million, all right? So, 22,700,000 years later, processes of evolution and change and adaptation and all of this other stuff, we finally get the very basic of all right? And so, okay, now, Homo sapien first appears in Africa, okay? That is the first evidence, all right? Which means that in other parts of the world, we still had other groups of human. Neanderthal, even though we don't study them, they were primarily in Europe, okay? You know, Australopithecine, you know, in the Far East and Southern Asia and whatnot. But little by little, Homo sapien begins to adapt and continues to grow so that within 200,000 years, by about 100,000 years ago, Homo sapien has taken over pretty much most of Africa, or has, you know, expanded, and those groups then begin to migrate, okay? Now, because they had adopted that hunter-gatherer lifestyle, okay, they're not moving because, holy crap, Africa's getting way too crowded, the real estate is expensive, you know, you can't find a decent place to live, you know, rent prices are through the... No, what are they following? Food, yes, they're following the food. They're following the herds that they hunt and the bushes and the apples and the roots and the berries that they eat, okay? That's basically it, all right? And so about 100,000 years ago, we begin to see then the first Homo sapiens expanding beyond the limits of Africa, okay? Now, Homo sapien is also the first hominin to begin to develop a type of language, okay? Or at least a more complex language, all right? So, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, some of the other ones, you know, Neanderthal, Australopithecus, I mean, they had their methods of communicating, but it wasn't like what we're doing. It was, me, grog. No, me, grog, you know. Sorry, what is your name? Shane, you Shane. All right, no, whatever. Okay, I guess you could be Grogu, or I don't know. Grogu, yeah. No, none of that stuff, okay? But Homo sapien begins the development of early spoken language, okay? Human-like creatures have been around for millions of years. 23 million years. Finally, we start to get words. Don't even get me started on writing, because that takes another, like, 150,000 years before we even start to write, okay? So yeah, all right? And now, just so you're aware, FYI, okay? So, they begin to leave Africa about 100,000 years ago. It isn't for another, help me with the math, 84,000 years that they finally begin to reach the edges of Asia and cross over into the Americas. All right. So humanity and other civilizations in the Americas are a lot younger than those in the old world.
I think I remember reading there was some minor evidence that humans came significantly before that.
Mm-hmm.
Like not the last ice age, the last ice age.
Yeah.
So like really early modern humans.
So yes, that would have been about 60. The last ice age was about 10,000 years ago. Okay.
I thought it was like 50,000. I might be wrong.
All right. Now, there is evidence, though, that Homo sapiens did in fact mix with some of the other human groups, and this is like something that I read a couple years back.
Yeah, my favorite is like the Neanderthal theory.
Yes. Yeah. They've tested some people and gone through like the whole DNA mapping and whatnot. And yeah, there are some of you, all right, that have like, like a 2%, 3%, whatever, Neanderthal DNA. So we know that at some point, Homo sapien did in fact mix with Neanderthal.
Yeah, my biggest evidence is Ron Perlman.
Yes, he does have the big forehead and the although every now and then I see someone and I'm like, holy fuck, that guy has Neanderthal in him somewhere. All right, like big 7-footer, like Andre the Giant or something. That's got to be something like strange happening. So, anyways, but yes. So there are some, and you won't get it from like 23andMe, like 2% Neanderthal. No, that'll tell you if you're like from Northern Ireland or Sicily or whatever. But yeah, the more complex, the more in-depth, and they did it a few years ago. Those DNA tests where they break down every single molecule. Modern humans, and not everyone, not all y'all's, but some of you might have a little bit of Neanderthal DNA. Especially those of you that are more of European origin. Okay, so yeah, kind of a little fun fact there. All right, now, so what allows us to be here and not a room full of Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon or Australopithecines? Okay, why did Homo sapiens survive and fast forward to 2023 and are sitting in Mr. Santos's history class? Well, a couple reasons. Number one, obviously, and this is once again, it's called evolution. They were able to adapt to the various surroundings, okay? Because if you think about it, going from Africa to Siberia to the European area to the mountains, islands, throughout the Pacific, the different parts of the Americas, jungles, deserts, okay, somehow, some way, over the thousands of years, Homo sapien was able to adapt to those environmental changes, okay, whereas some of the other hominin groups could not. And so their DNA basically just died out, with the exception of the little teeny bits of Neanderthal that are in humanity, okay? It is with Homo sapien that we begin to see the early stages of cultural development. So depending on where these groups were and depending on what natural phenomena, they experienced, what environmental phenomena, we begin to see the development of different customs and practices. And believe it or not, okay, habits and rituals, they kind of give you a reason to live. all right? And they kind of give you a purpose. And so having that purpose, other than don't get eaten by a tiger, kind of gives you, provides some of that mental impetus to continue to live and to adapt. But probably the most important thing, and this you can see if you go to any, museum and look at their paleontological section. In this case, Homo sapien had a bigger skull. Homo sapien had a larger brain capacity. And so because of this, Homo sapien was able to adapt, was able to quickly recognize the changes and make, adjustments to allow them to survive. Okay, that is why Homo sapien is the only hominin to develop a language, because now the things that I learn, I can pass on to my children, and then those Homo sapien can pass it on to their children, because we have a language where we can teach each other. Hey, okay, you don't have to wait for the lightning to hit. Here's a way to create fire. Okay, those red berries on the tree? Yeah, those will kill you. Okay, but if you eat these berries, those are fine. The one, and a friend sent me a meme once about mushrooms. It was like, I wonder how many people, how long it took before people realized, if I eat this mushroom, I'm going to see God. If I eat this mushroom, I'm going to die. If I'm going to eat this mushroom, then yeah, I'm going to be full and I'm going to have a nice full plate. Because there's some that'll give you a psychedelic trip. There's some that are just poisonous and will kill you. And then, of course, there's the mushrooms that, are good for you. You can eat. Throw it on a salad. Grill it with a steak. All right, And so with that language, okay, I'm able to say, hey, daughter, okay, pass this on to your children. This mushroom will give you a trip like you never believed. Okay, you want to hear colors? Okay, you're gonna die. All right, eat this, you're gonna die. All right, put this on the fresh killed gazelle. Oh my gosh, best dinner you'll ever have. And so then my child, sorry, you used to be my child, then passes it on to her children. Okay, and the same thing. And so yeah, Homo sapien then is able to survive. All right, because of this greater brain capacity, which includes the creation of language. All right, now, I might have mentioned it on Monday. Mr. Santos is obsessed with maps. I love maps. It's one of my weird habit things, that and Star Wars. But maps, okay? I've always been fascinated by maps, so obviously a lot of, bless you, your assignments have to do with maps, and I do throw in maps here. This map basically just shows the migration of Homo sapien, okay? As I mentioned, it does start in Africa, and so between 200 and 150,000 years ago, we see Homo sapiens spreading throughout different parts of Africa. Around 100,000 years ago, we see Homo sapien finally leaving Africa and moving into other parts of the world. The first evidence for Homo sapien in Europe was about 40,000 years ago, okay? And then, of course, well, this map's a little different from what your book says, because once again, nobody actually was able to put, like, Grog was here, 15,000 years, whatever. Okay, so our best guess, all right, we're within a 1,000-year range. Humanity crossed over the Bering Strait, and hopefully you learned this in high school. I remember that's where I learned it. During one of the last ice ages, okay, the land froze over, ocean levels dropped, so basically there was a frozen land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, which allowed humanity to follow whatever animals and cross. When the glaciers melt, that fills up with water. But by then, the humans that have crossed over, okay, by about 12,000 years ago, we see evidence of humanity in places like Mexico and Central America. So it's not like they, it wasn't a sprint. It took anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 years before humans, from crossing Alaska, making it all the way across down into some decent climate. Okay, where they could relax a little more. All right. Now, as I mentioned, okay, and we'll look at some of the things that Homo sapien then was able to achieve that allowed their survival. All right. I've already mentioned language. okay? And I've already, given you the example that by having language, thoughts, ideas, knowledge, etc., was able to be passed on. And so those changes, those adaptations that were made to, survive the environment, all right, I'm able to give it to my descendants, and they're able to give it to their descendants, and so that line is able to continue. And of course, grandchildren are probably coming up with new things as well, and so then they can pass that on, all right? In this case, like I said, the lifestyle was hunting and gathering, all right? And so that's why these groups moved around, all right? And that's why these groups spread, all right? And more than likely, we go to an area, there is no animals, there is no food, then we're going to keep going, okay? While humanity, and we'll talk about, there's a big A word coming up, but while humanity was in a hunter-gatherer stage, okay, groups remained small, all right? Because unless you're going to kill 20 buffalo at once, you're not going to be able to feed a large group with just killing one animal, okay? And of course, it's not just the meat, but we're using, the skins, we're using the hooves, we're using the insides, and so, the resources that come from this animal aren't going to be, enough for a large group. Same thing with gathering, okay? Yeah, maybe I can gather a few apples from a tree, but obviously that is not going to be enough to feed a very large group, okay? And we've already talked about that recognition of familial ties. So most of these small groups were basically small families, small groups of maybe 1 or 2 families, all right? Sometimes 3, because you do need that genetic diversity, all right? As far as we know from the evidence that has been left behind, it was the men who hunted, so they went out in hunting parties, brought back the meat, and the women's responsibility was to gather the various foods, whether it was fruit off of trees or bushes, whether it was roots, whether it was plants, whether it was vegetables that were used to supplement the meat, okay? In addition, no, not beer. You also need water, okay? So women were responsible for finding fresh sources of water. And when we think of hunting, we typically think of, land animals. What can this also include? Fish. Yeah, fishing. All right, so men were also responsible for, if you're near a river or near the ocean, gathering fish, okay? And because of this increased capacity, because of this higher intellectual ability, okay, and and now granted, it's over thousands of years, but we have this system now of hunting, meat, fishing, okay, gathering fruits, vegetables, whatever, okay. There is some time then to develop other intellectual things. And no, we're not talking about giant sculptures or Picasso paintings, but, okay, we see early evidence of painting and music and basic primitive forms of art, okay? And of course, those simple stories to explain the unexplainable, okay? We see the development of myths and mythologies and whatnot, okay? I had to study this in high school, so, Greek mythology, Norse, yeah, they made us kind of read that. For some reason, they thought Greek was better. And of course, in my studies, I've also learned some of the myths of various Native American groups, specifically those from Mexico and South America. But, obviously we're not just explaining, oh, it's cloudy today, okay? We're explaining, Apollo riding his sun chariot across the sky. We're explaining the story of Persephone and why it's dark and cold and dead in the winter, but bright and sunny and green in the summer, all right? Don't worry, I'll share it later. Okay, all of those other stories and myths and to explain the seasons, to explain the sunshine, to explain all of these things. All right, I put here Altamira, Spain, because this is one of the oldest examples of painting, of art created by early humans. What does that kind of look like? A bull, yeah. And in this case, the bull is the national symbol of Spain because of, and it's not just Altamira, that's like one of the more famous ones. There's other cave paintings they found, and it's all like, bulls, cows, whatever. And in bigger paintings, you can see, the hunting parties and all of this other stuff. And so, now, great, like I said, it's not like, oh, Santos, I've seen better at a museum. Of course you've seen better at a museum. All right, these are like cave people. Because someone pointed out, wait, why are the eyes like, I can't even draw eyes, all right? So that's actually pretty damn good for someone who lived like 20,000 years ago. Okay, and stuff. All right. Now, we'll end with this because this is the A word. All right, and you do need to remember agriculture and what begins to happen. All right, because a hunting-gatherer lifestyle, all right, basically kept humanity at a certain level. All right. Around 10,000 BCE. Actually, you can take notes. I need to explain a few things because you are all going to be amateur historians at some point. Well, this semester. Okay. Sometimes historians and some books will use the term prehistoric. Okay, that does not refer to like Stone Age or whatever. Prehistoric just means that it happened before writing. Okay, because obviously since it wasn't written down, I mean, we're taking our best guess. All right, writing doesn't come into play until about 2,000, 3,000 years after this. Okay, so anything before writing is considered prehistoric. All right, now a lot of you maybe I know. Me, yes, because I'm old. All right. When we were given dates, okay, typically it was listed as BC or AD. Does anyone know what BC stands for?
Before Christ.
Before Christ. Okay. So I'm going to put before Christ. What about AD?
Anno Domini.
Not quite, but I used to think that. Say it again.
Anno Domini.
All right. That's Latin, Anno Domini, for, it basically means the year of our Lord, which is Jesus. Okay? Now, most history books have now changed that because obviously this is a very Christian-centric thing. And just FYI, even though Christianity is big, and I'm assuming a lot of you were raised in a Christian tradition, most of the world is not Christian, okay? And so, what they have done, even though it still follows the basic rule, now they've changed it to BCE and CE. BCE stands for before the Common Era, and CE, the Common Era. I mean, it still follows the life of Jesus, but we're not actually like vocally referring to it. So your textbook uses BCE and CE, okay? And so that's what it means. And if you learned it the old way, AD, okay, and BC, all right? I'll do this on Friday. You guys already took the notes, so we'll start off fresh on that, okay?